There are two big questions in this video. One is, how flexible is your current amplifier? And two is, are tube integrated amplifiers inherently more musical than solid state? I want you to hold your thoughts on those as I work through my review of the Galion Audio TS34, it's up there on the rack, tube integrated amplifier. And I really wanted this review to reflect my experiences with this amplifier because it's been quite confusing, but very educational and of course, very enjoyable. And that is because in one configuration, I think this is my least favorite Galion audio product. But in a different configuration, I like it a hell of a lot. And this will include important comparisons to similar priced amplifier setups, one of them being Galion's P75 and A75 pre-power setup, to see what is the best way to spend your money. And as always, we have a huge amount to cover. The TS34 is the entry-level tube integrated amplifier from Galion Audio, but don't let entry-level fool you because it's far from entry-level priced or specified or for its performance, and it's a very flexible amplifier. I think Galion's tube amplifiers are about as flexible as it gets, and that is important, as you will see. I mean, they have different sound modes or profiles for starters. The user can select to listen to it in either Class A or Class AB operating modes, and that is pretty unique, I think. And it's been designed to use either EL34 or KT88 and I think 77 tubes as well, and again the user can select between those. And I was curious to know what would be best from an EL34 or a KT88. And looking at the TS34, it's very obviously a Galion amplifier. The buttons and the volume control are all typical Galion, so that means quite clunky buttons and a very small but smooth operating motorized volume knob. And if your knob is small, at least saying it's a smooth operator is something, I suppose. The smaller tube complement are a pair of 12AT7 and 12AX7. The included power tubes are Svein EL34 in the C variety. Round the back, you can see 4 analog inputs, all single-ended, so there are no balanced connections here. There are 2 sets of speaker taps, one for 8 and one for 4 ohm speakers. There is a switch for noise reduction, and there is a switch for selecting the amplifier to accept either EL34 or KT88 tubes. One thing I do really like about Galion amplifiers is their automated tube biasing system, but I have to be careful in how I explain this because a number of people shouted at me in my 120 SE review, I know some time ago, that apparently this is not an automatic bias system, so hopefully I explain it correctly to you this time. You press a couple of buttons either on the remote control or the amplifier itself, and the TS34 will bias the tubes for you automatically. And I did find this very useful because this is an amplifier that has different sound modes and operating modes. Some of them do need the tubes to be biased after you select them, but some do not, such as selecting between the 3 different sound profiles labelled as A, which uses more amplifier feedback, and B, which uses less amplifier feedback. The third mode is labelled T, and that engages the tone controls, and I'm sure everybody knows what they do. But Galion say not all tone controls are created equal because the TS34's treble adjustment actually adjusts the sibilance region of the music rather than adjusting like the very highest kind of sparkly treble frequencies. So that is interesting and definitely different. And then if you want to select between Class A and Class AB modes, it's very similar to biasing the tube, so just a couple of button presses on the front or on the remote control. And speaking of the remote control, it's heavy and it does feel well built and built to last. I did flip the TS34 upside down to pop the hood or really remove its base, and I am not as familiar with the internals of tube amplifiers. However, I was definitely not expecting it to be so jam-packed. Galion say they are using some exotic caps here, intended to boost the mid-range performance, such as Jupiter Bumblebee, as well as using Clarity and Solon caps, and I could see all of this and more. And there was a lot here that seemed familiar from recently looking inside Galion's P75 preamp, just less of some of it and more of others. And this is a heavy amplifier too at 28 kilograms, and that is normally a good sign for a tube amp of having a good power supply that we know is very important. And speaking of power, the TS34 can deliver 25 watts per channel into 8 ohms and a maximum of 50 watts per channel into 4 ohms in its Class A operating mode. In Class AB, we do get a little more power on paper, 40 into 8 and a maximum of 60 into 4. But don't let those numbers fool you, because I didn't notice like an obvious uplift in like the power of the amplifier between A and AB. I'll speak about that more shortly. And then for the important price, the TS34 costs just about £2,400 delivered to your door here in the UK, and then just under $3,000 delivered for you guys in the US, which of course is a fair chunk of money for a hi-fi amplifier, but it's far from crazy, as we know, given how expensive some amplifiers do get. For sound quality, I think it makes sense to get some basics out of the way right at the beginning to save any confusion later on. I did 99% of the listening for this review over many months with the TS34 in its Class A operating mode. And that is because every time I tested it in Class AB, I expected maybe the sound to get worse in ways, but noticeably better in other ways. And maybe that could be the case in some situations for some people, but I did not experience that. I experienced better sound for every single area with the amplifier in Class A mode. So naturally, that is what I used it in pretty much all of the time. And then for the different sound profiles, A, B, and T, I wasn't a fan of the tone control, so I have to be honest about that. But listening between A and B, remembering that changes the feedback in the amplifier. So B is less, A uses more. I generally preferred the TS34 used in its B sound profile, so less feedback, but that really depended on the quality of the tubes that were installed in it. So with the stock tubes, I actually preferred sound mode A, because A, with more feedback, gives the amplifier like a more well-behaved sound. It's more organized, the timing is slightly better, it's less edgy sounding, and it's like more well-controlled, more well-behaved sounding. So with the stock tubes, yeah, that was more enjoyable. I preferred that. But that whole controlled nature of it makes it sound a little bit more solid-state amplifier-like. But the first thing that really stood out to me about this amplifier is that it's not a stereotypical sounding valve amp. It's not a soft or warm or mushy sounding amplifier. It's actually quite the opposite. It's more modern sounding, I think. It's lively, it's energetic, it's upbeat. And I think Thomas calls it a fast sounding amplifier on the Galion website. And I was a little bit unsure about that statement at first. Could I actually hear that? But through this review and all the comparisons that I did, yes, I can see where he's coming from with that explanation. And Thomas told me that he's chosen to use EL34 tubes here for better vocal sound quality. And the vocals are definitely more pronounced. They are definitely more forward and more grab your attention in the middle of the soundstage. And I tried to test a whole variety of different tracks, male and female, to see what kind of special character or magic maybe the TS34, or really I suppose the EL34 tube, could give me for different vocal. And I will leave that comment there for a second, but I definitely noticed there was a difference. But would I say it was magic or special? Maybe not so much at this stage. but you do get a very good soundstage from this amplifier. It's very clear, very organized, very pronounced, with an excellent sense of like spatiality and depth. So all of those important audiophile traits or desirable qualities are very well met with this amplifier. And the bass was surprisingly punchy and quite full, especially for tracks like Living in America by Salt. The opening bass riffs in this track were presented really bold and punchy, and of course I like that. But even listening to more of my guilty pleasure, heavy electronic music and some light and fluffy drum and bass, there was a good amount of bass impact and a good amount of bass drive and energy, always keeping the music on the front foot. So the bass clarity was pretty spot on, and I should probably say very good for a tube amp at this price. The treble delivery from this amplifier was interesting because it was different. It was clear, very, very clear. That was great, but it was also quite crisp, or maybe even crispy, a little extra crispy. And that's interesting because, of course we have like a Thomas Galion voice in here, which is designed to elevate the treble a little bit, to make it stand out, to make it sparkle a bit more and pop a bit more, and it definitely does. And I found that in some music that was a great thing. However, other music, maybe it was a little bit too much of a good thing for me personally. But in the main, I found the Galion to be a good sounding amplifier with some very good standout traits. But it definitely has what I would call like an obvious character that I heard as a type of sound balance. And that balance didn't quite hit my own personal preference. I have been finding the vocals to sound just a little tonally undernourished. That left me wanting more of a tube richness and fullness and warmth in the sound. But look, that is me comparing the Galion to like every other amplifier I've had in here and the preference I've built up as a result of that. And it is just my own personal preference situation. Like we can't avoid, our bias in that regard, can we? So just like take all that into account. I needed to compare the TS34 to an amplifier around the same price. And I felt the Cambridge Audio EXA100 would be ideal. It also has an upbeat, lively character. And I wanted to see which amplifier might sound the best, and would the tube amp be very obviously more musical sounding. And at first I wasn't sure about the Cambridge because the sound difference, because such a difference in how it sounded compared to the Galion. But once it had been on a few hours and I'd cranked the volume a little bit, it did remind me just why I like that integrated so much. It's a very, very good all-rounder integrated at its price. And it very clearly showed to me what I had thought were the shortcomings of the Galion, because the Cambridge could sound bigger and more dynamic while maintaining what I would say is a greater sense of composure or relaxed nature to the music. And maybe that was because it was controlling the speakers better, or maybe it's just because it has less of an intended character. Because I think the Galion's character, it seems to want to focus more of the sound in the middle regions. So there is more emphasis on the vocals, on the upper bass, and on the treble too. So they do all stand out more. However, once I'd adjusted to how the Cambridge was delivering the same vocals, yes, they was maybe not as front and center and big, but they do sound balanced in a way that felt maybe a little more honest to me, with just as much soundstage spatiality and depth being shown in a track like Gypsy Woman by Levi Scott. And if you're a fan of 90s dance music, and let's face it, who isn't, I think you'll love this piano version of this cool, legendary dance track. This is definitely worth a listen. So summing up this initial comparison, I think there are some very real-world things to think about here outside of sound quality, such as the Cambridge is a lot smaller, it generates a lot less heat, so it's more flexible in terms of where you might place it. And it also has more power, so maybe it's a little more flexible with the speakers you use, but I'm not so sure on that one. But where you get the difference is the Cambridge is less expensive, it has a DAC built in, and it has balanced connections. So it has some very real world advantages. But even so, the Galion stands out in the way it sounds because it is really quite different. It's really quite unique in a way for how it sounds. But it also stands out for being flexible. The Cambridge has no sound flexibility at all, and the Galion has loads. And that is really important, as you'll see. But look, if somebody put a gun to my head and said, look, you have to pick one of these amplifiers to take to a desert island with this system, I have to be honest and say it would be the Cambridge. I enjoyed the Cambridge more from the two at this stage. But this is far from the end of my exploration and comparison. Probably the more interesting comparison would be between the TS34 and Galion's P75 and A75 pre-power amp setup, what I'm calling the A75 combo, because price-wise they are very similar. Yes, it costs a few £100 more for the 75 combo delivered to your door here in the UK, but you are getting two hi-fi products for that extra money. And I think it's an insignificant price difference really when we talk about amplifiers, because it's so important, really important, to get the right one, to get the best one, and to get the right and best one. I always think it's worth spending a little more, a lot more in some cases. And listening to the 75 combo, I have to be honest, I instantly preferred it, because it was almost the perfect balance of everything from both amplifiers before. You get some of Thomas's Galion tuning, so a bolder bass and a sprinkle more treble sparkle, but I think that balance is better judged here because it is more subtle. What I noticed most was just how much smoother the music was and how more graceful it was, especially in the vocals, while still being big and full scale sounding in the bass. The 75 combo just has a better balance for my personal tastes. Compared to either the TS34's maybe slightly over-exuberant sound, and it has a richer sound than what the Cambridge offers. I think that is because the P75 is a tube preamplifier, so we still get some tube sound here, what I call like a tube glossiness, not glass, gloss, like a richness, like a sweetening of the music, which of course is a coloration on the music. I am fully aware of that, but I don't care if I enjoy the music more, if it connects more to me on an emotional level, I really don't care. But the only reason it can connect with me on an emotional level is because yes, we do get like a glossing or glossiness to the music, a richening, a sweetening of the music, but without any too obvious negative trade-offs. So we still get excellent clarity, excellent timing, excellent soundstage, really like energetic and dynamic sound. But I do have to hold my hands up to cheating here, because in my P75 review I explained how I changed the stock tubes to some Ray Tubes Select 12AT7. And the difference they made was very dramatic for the richness, for the sweetness and the glossiness quality to the music. So much so, I cannot take them out now. So if Ray Tubes want to get them back from me, they might have to meet me in the Octagon. Like, all jokes aside, obviously adding a set of like upgraded, Ray Tube Select 87s, two matched pairs will add £600, roughly £600 to the costs. So that takes the 75 combo up price-wise to by far the most expensive at around £3,300. But I think it more than easily justifies that price for the sound that it delivers. It really does. But it does raise some more other real-world considerations here. A pre-power setup needs more space. It needs more cables. It needs more power. So it's definitely less convenient. And all of those things have a real-world cost. And it also opened up a more interesting comparison for me, and it set like a new benchmark. So I thought, could I change the tubes in the TS34 to match the 75 combo's performance, or maybe could I even exceed it? There was certainly no harm in trying. I am by no means a tube or valve expert. However, I've messed around with them enough in the last 2 years to experience what different ones can do. And I do feel good tubes are worth spending money on, because I think what they do is they can help get the best out of the tube hi-fi products that you own. They just bring out the best in what it can do. And I have here more Ray Tubes, a quad matched set of Ray Tubes best EL34, it's called the Reserve, and they cost £1,429. And I also have a quad matched set of Reserve KT88s that cost £1,599. So these are very expensive tubes, but they are supposed to be the best of modern produced tubes available, featuring what is termed as a magic coating of monocrystalline carbon that is said to improve the tube's cooling, to block noise, and improve the behavior and efficiency of the tube. So they are supposed to be better than NOS tubes with warranty and a benefit of modern manufacturing. So that is interesting. But look, I have no way to test that. But I can say putting these tubes in the TS34, man, they made a very big difference for everything really that I was looking for from this amplifier, like the pleasure in music. And after the very long running period of 100+ hours, the TS34 sounded very obviously richer and more tonally full and pleasing, especially in the vocals. I could hear better now why some people say EL34s do special things for vocals. But the bass was also more full and just more solid and just more tonally full and pleasing to me overall. And I felt that just relaxed the quality of the music more and just relaxed me at the same time. And of course, I liked that. And this balanced better for me with a slightly softer and definitely sweeter sounding treble, but still with the same lively character. The forward character now seemed to bother me a lot less, or at least it did listening in isolation. Because switching to the reserve KT88, I found that I'm just not an EL34 tube guy, or at least not at the moment, because the 34 seems to have like a very obvious, distinct character, which is pleasing at first. Like you really like it at first, like the vocals popping and standing out, and like the more energy in the middle region of the sound. It is cool and it is very interesting with some music, but I found the KT88s, maybe it's because they sound more familiar to me. They sound more like how the 75 combo does, and just the way music is just a little more relaxed. It's a little more sat back rather than energetic coming at you. It's all just a little bit more relaxed. But with the reserve KT88s, there was loads of like richness and like fullness and just pleasing tone now coming through from the TS34. Like this is good sound, really good integrated amplifier sound. I was enjoying it a lot. What was more interesting was now trying to pick a winner between the TS34 and the Galion 75 combo was like splitting hairs, really. And that's not because they sounded the same. It's really very different across like the three systems, the 75, TS34, KT88, TS34, EL34. Like it was very, very different. But what I found every time I changed the system, which takes a bit of time, I just found myself naturally kind of enjoying the new sound. And that made me forget what I liked and disliked about the old amplifier setup sound. It made it really difficult to try and pick a winner from them all, because they was all just very good, very enjoyable in their own way. But what I took from that was just how flexible the TS34 is, and maybe as a core of an amplifier, it's very well designed to give you maybe some of the best of what the KT88s can offer and some of the best of what the EL34s can offer, like the difference in how those tubes sound. Don't get me wrong, there was still a lot that was similar, like a full rich sound, like the middle region in some regards was similar, the bass was very similar. It's still the same speakers at the end of the day, but there was enough of a distinct difference to appreciate them as being different, like to give you a different sound. And I really can't speak more highly of the Ray tubes. They're fantastic. So if you're looking for more of like a full, rich and glossy sound, I can strongly recommend you check out these tubes. So summing up my thoughts on the Galion TS34, it's not easy. In a way, it's confusing because straight out of the box, it's really just not the amplifier for me. And that's probably because I'm just not an EL34 tube guy. I just don't value and appreciate what that tube is looking to do, which is absolutely fine. But I need to be honest about that. But what I did find and what I have found I do appreciate about it, is its flexibility. The fact it's not like kind of pigeonholing you into one sound. It's very flexible. It allows you to change some things to try and find the sound that works for you and the speakers in your room and your current system. But there is also more flexibility for making it sound better with better tubes, or maybe just as your taste might change over time. So that is a very real world thing again. And in terms of answering my second question, are tube amplifiers inherently more musical than solid state? Well, this review, testing and process has proved to me that no, definitely not. It's not a guarantee. Just because it's a tube amplifier, it will sound more musical. Definitely not. But it can do. But I think what's more important as a takeaway from this is that tube gear offers us something different. It offers us a different sound profile or balance or way of presenting music compared to solid state. And it's in the differences, like the nuances of difference in the way music is presented, where the fun lives. It's like where we find something that communicates music to us in a way that kind of connects on some kind of emotional level. And that's where the TS34 has really stood out to me. I keep mentioning it, is in that flexibility, the way you can manipulate things with it to make it sound more like how you want, right? That is really very cool. But I have to say the products that stood out to me probably most through this testing has been Galion's 75 combo. The P75, A75, really that P75 preamp, that one really stands out to me with the right tubes in it. Don't overlook that. So I hope this whole review has been interesting in a different kind of way, a bit more broad way. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. If you have, hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel for more.